created this culture of we're striving to hit this objective and to push further physically on the field and to push further mentally every single day. And so having those markers of progress is really important for an athlete.
Welcome to a new edition of the City Voice podcast. I'm joined by an incredibly special guest, Kelly Roderick, Head of Sports Science for St. Louis City SC. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
So just want to get a quick understanding of how you're feeling at the moment. Everything's going well, 4-0, a lot of fit players out there. How are you feeling?
We're feeling pretty good. You know, I don't think we could have asked for a better start. So the guys are, really excited about keeping going and just continuing to do what we're doing. So, yeah.
We've got an excellent view of the pitch today. You've been out there
Yes.
on the touchline, close to the atmosphere. Like, how has it been for you in comparison to the other sports clubs that you've worked for?
So I was pretty fortunate when I was at the Crew. They opened up the field when I was still working there. And I would have to say this environment was even more electric as far as how involved the fans are in the game, which I thought was really unique, and how they follow along. And that, to me, it's a different feeling. It really uplifts you.
Fantastic. Okay, we're going to get into the more serious side of this podcast a little bit later, but the super serious side starts now. We've got some quick fire questions. Please answer honestly. Let's go. Dog or cat?
Dog.
Dog. Do you have a dog?
Yes. Miss Nala.
Miss Nala?
Yeah.
And what breed?
She's a Japanese Spitz, so just, a little marshmallow fluff. But yeah, she's about 12 years old, and I've had her for her whole life.
Fantastic. Coffee or tea?
Coffee, 1000%.
Do you have a favorite coffee place in St. Louis?
No, but I am open to recommendations, so I need to explore a little bit more.
Brilliant. Favorite place to vacation in America?
Probably California, I would say. My brother lives out there. I obviously spent my last year out there, but it's a cool place. I like the whole coastline.
Brilliant. Away day you are most excited about this season?
Vancouver. I've never been to Vancouver, so I'm excited to see what that looks like. And just, I've heard it's beautiful and absolutely stunning, so I'm excited to see that.
Brilliant. Toasted ravioli or Emo's pizza?
Toasted ravioli.
Toasted ravioli. Good
Yeah.
answer. Favorite city moment this season so far?
Probably our first win. I think it was not just emotional, but everything coming together after. I know a lot of people have been a part of the process even longer than I have, so I can only imagine what they were feeling on that day. But just to be able to come out and have that first appearance and come away with the win that we did was really special. I would say the close second is our home opener, obviously. That was also another really, really special moment. But that first game, to step on the field together as a club for the first time, I think was really unique.
Incredible atmosphere there as well. Those
Yeah.
Austin fans.
Yeah,
put on a show.
Austin's a great atmosphere. So
Favorite film?
That's an impossible question.
Yeah.
My brother wanted to be a film director.
Yeah.
So I grew up watching so many films. And I wouldn't say that I had one in particular that changed my life necessarily, but I do really like watching films. So.
Do you have a film recommendation of 2023 so far?
Ooh. No, I don't.
No?
Can you tell I don't get out much and do anything outside of work this year? That's pretty soon. No, I even, when I watched a little bit of the Academy Awards, I honestly didn't even know half the films that were in there at that time, which is really sad. It's for the first time, so it's been a busy year.
Yeah, same here. I saw those. I saw Pinocchio.
Oh, you did? I have not seen
but
that.
The Del Toro film. It's very good.
Yeah, okay.
Favorite sports science term? Like a real jargony sports science term that you're like, when I roll this out, the room gets intimidated.
Okay. I have two things. I have a quote, maybe. Let me think of it. But one would be peripheral fatigue, which I couldn't even say.
Peripheral fatigue.
Yeah.
What's
so
that?
it's pretty interesting because you have more of nervous system fatigue that we like to say is like your CNS fatigue, and peripheral fatigue, which is more related to your muscle. So it's just a way of defining fatigue in two different places, essentially.
I've got that noted down. who do you sit next to on the team bus or plane?
I sit next to Alex on the plane because we have a mutual understanding of, plane etiquette and when we want to talk and when we want to work.
That's a rare find.
It's a rare find, I know.
Yeah.
We just have this like unspoken understanding.
Alex Langer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right,
So, and then on the bus, pretty much anyone who's willing to sit next to me in my technology because it does take up some space.
A little bit of a space invader.
Yeah.
Great. Favorite book? Or is it the same with this film?
So actually, I did listen. I would say it was on tape, so it's a little different. Did I say on tape? That sounds so dated. It was an Audible, When Breath Becomes Air, which was a really great book. It's about a neurosurgeon who ends up being diagnosed with basically a cancer that's so far prolonged that he doesn't have a chance. And so it just talks about life and how he comes to find it after his diagnosis. And it's pretty powerful.
Do you listen to audiobooks when you travel with a team?
Yeah. Well, sometimes if I have time, but mostly, so when I drove here from where I'm from, it's about a 8-hour drive, and that's when I hammered out some of those.
Oh, lovely. Final one, secret skill that you have that nobody's talking about.
Photography. So you might have picked up on this from your digging and, on my background a little bit, but I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in photography. So I studied photojournalism and, secretly like to take a lot of pictures, but I have one piece that was in the student union or selected for an award in the student union when I graduated from Ohio State. So it's still there.
That is a great secret skill. Okay, so now we're going to go into the Kelly fact sheet. Just to give people a bit of an idea of who you are. You're the head of sports science for St. Louis City SC, the first woman in MLS history to hold that position. You've held soccer roles at Angel City and Columbus Crew. You're also a winner, MLS Cup and Campeones Cup winner. You've got a bachelor's degree, a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and a master's, and you are certified across 5 disciplines. Might even be more because I was trying to cross-reference. I think there might be more. And you are a dog lover, Nala.
Yes.
Miss Nala.
Miss
Sorry,
Nala.
must correct myself.
Miss
there.
Queen Nala. You gotta have everything. Their full title.
Great. So that's a really interesting fact sheet. So I want to get to like the origins of that. Like, tell us about where you grew up.
I grew up in Ohio mostly. I was born in Arizona, but we moved to Ohio when I was 2 years old. So pretty much from Ohio and various places. I was in Hudson, Ohio early on until a sophomore year in high school. And then I moved to Upper Arlington in Columbus, Ohio.
You hail from a family of athletes.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that and how it kind of influenced like your thinking growing up.
So my father, first and foremost, was a professional golfer. And so I grew up watching a lot of golf. And he ended up going to the senior tour as an agent and retiring in that way. But early on, I didn't get to necessarily see him play golf as much because he had retired by the time I was big enough to understand. But that's been a huge part of my life, and just him and being surrounded by professional athletes. But then also my grandfather was a Olympian softball player and played basketball at Ohio State. My great-grandfather was a polo player and played in college, not necessarily professionally. And then my uncle has done 9 Ironmans. And so our family is just always active. We have a lot of people that have played sports in college. And so I would say we're pretty passionate about it. And it's exciting when we all get together and are able to watch sports. A little competitive.
So growing up knowing that family history, is there like does it feel like there's a pressure to stay in sport, or is it just like it runs in the DNA? It's like a natural gravitation towards.
No, there wouldn't be a pressure. I don't think. The only person actually that is probably not an athlete or involved in sports is my brother. So he's probably the complete opposite of me in everything he does. He's very creative, artistic, but he played every single sport, so he still was driven into playing sports and participating. And ironically, his team always won, even if he didn't play. He always got the championship, and they always went. But I think being a part of that just really defined my career and who I was as a person and who I am today, because sports have really shaped who I am, and it's just always been a part of me.
So you've got sports ability in the genes.
Yeah.
Which particular sport, like which did you choose? Because there's a...
Yeah, I started off swimming. So I swam competitively all the way up until I was a sophomore in high school. And then after that, I played field hockey as well and ended up playing in college. And so those were the main two sports that I was as an athlete. And then, but obviously, now these guys compete in everything every single time we travel. They like pickleball, they want tennis, they want everything. So the coaching staff is really gets into it. So
you get roped into that.
You've got I do.
Swiss Army knife skill set to be with these.
It's not fun when your first time playing pickleball is with Bradley. I will say that.
So we've heard a lot of rumors that he's good at golf as well. And he pretends he's not.
They're very good at golf. Yeah, they're pretty decent.
So you played hockey at Michigan State and OSU. What was your biggest lesson? What was your biggest life lesson of playing in that team sport?
So when I played field hockey at Michigan State, I ended up sustaining a really bad injury and transferred back to Ohio State, which then led me to coaching. So I have to credit that for kind of creating that pathway to where I am now. But one of the things I really learned, my coach was Dutch, and I learned that Dutch people are very blunt and honest, and that I appreciated that. I never didn't know what he was thinking or where he saw me playing or what I needed to do in order to succeed. And that's something that I've taken with me as a coach, because I've never wanted to not be honest and tell someone exactly where they stand or what's going on.
I had a Dutch boss as well.
Yeah, right?
Similar.
See?
Yeah, similar. Very similar. Yeah, very talented, but very blunt.
He was 6'7" too, so he was, not intimidating at all.
So, when did you know that you wanted to have a career in sports, and particularly like the direction that you took?
I don't think there was a time that I didn't want to have a career in sports in some capacity. I think early on I wanted to be the athlete and certainly participate at the highest level that I could. When that didn't pan out, it was try to be as closely involved in it as I possibly can. And even just being in the collegiate sports and working with athletes in that way, I think for me, I was always looking for a team and to be a part of something on a daily basis and to work for that greater purpose. And so that's what led me into the professional environment, really.
And let's talk about your qualifications. You're extremely decorated. I've got a bachelor's at Michigan State, a bachelor's fine arts at Ohio State, a master's at Ohio University. You have certifications or qualifications in strength and conditioning, cycling, yoga, CPR and AED, and weightlifting. So, like, you're very academic.
Yes.
Does this say that you've got an always on approach to learning, and do you think that helps you in a it's not a new field, but I feel like it's like sports science is a fast developing field. Do you feel like that sort of underpinning really helps you like push forward?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Have you ever taken the Strength Finder test? No? Okay. I had to take it 3 times for various roles that I've been in. And something that always came up was knowledge and that I was a learner. So that I always seek out information and enjoy being able to develop that skill and learn as much as I can. So that is why I get so excited about sports science too, because there's endless possibilities and the ability to continue to open up new doors and start to see new things just with the advancements that the field is making as a whole. So that to me is just something that's always been really important. And then the other things on the Strength Finder, it said that I was very competitive, so you should just never compete with me.
I'm not playing you at pickleball. No way.
Nope.
So when the strength and conditioning, cycling, yoga, and weightlifting, do you feel like all of those things have come together nicely and that they support you in the role that you have in soccer now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that they all give me a different perspective and how I approach an athlete. One of the things about like yoga, meditation, and recover, I think those blend really well together, and that you could argue is probably how I got into the professional soccer environment. When I was in grad school, I was studying psychological skills training and whether or not you could develop mental toughness, right? Everyone's like, oh, mental toughness, we need that. How do we do it? Nobody knows. And so I really wanted to understand, is this possible to develop this? And I was pairing it with recovery and yoga and meditation and breathing. And so trying to determine whether or not that could be possible while you're recovering. Does it help enhance recovery? Is mindset important to that? And that was what piqued the interest of the crew and when I had the conversation with them for the first time. In addition to me pitching myself and trying to find a role in any way that I could. But yeah, that's one of the things that I think is pretty unique and cool about this whole thing.
So you graduated college in 2017. So are you saying your education drove you towards soccer versus an I love soccer approach, or is it kind of a mix of two?
I would say it's a mix of two. Well, I worked in the collegiate realm for quite some time and did lots of internships. And so when I realized that I couldn't really spot an lineman squatting 500 pounds, that was when I was kind of like, maybe I should try another sport. No, but I think in all seriousness, soccer, the way performance is approached in soccer is an art, right? It is so much different than any other sport that you see because the level of detail that is applied to every single component of what we're doing. And that was really exciting for me. And while, yes, my education and my drive to understand and solve problems and learn was always something that put me in that direction, I also was interested in the high level that soccer requires you to perform at, and how do we get that? So that is also something, on top of being passionate about soccer, I think, maybe this isn't something I should ever admit, but the passion for soccer as a sport came pretty instantaneously after being involved in the sport, but it wasn't necessarily what brought me exactly to that.
So what are some of the quirks of soccer that make it interesting compared to other sports, like specifically? I
think the type of athlete that you're dealing with, 90 minutes is pretty taxing, but it also requires a high level of cognitive ability and to be able to make decisions. And it's a beautiful sport to watch physically and what they are capable of doing. So I think all of those parts of it make it really exciting as a scientist to look at and to watch. But really, other sports like football or American football, as we like to say, is basically a car crash every time that you watch a game, and that's what's happening to the body, and you're like, oh no, how do I deal with that? And other sports have that excitement, but I've just always found that soccer is really mesmerizing, and just how you watch it and what you can see.
So you had your internship at Columbus Crew, that eventually led to a full-time role. Talk to me about that first experience, in the professional game of soccer.
Yeah, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into when I first. So I had volunteered at a testing for the Columbus Crew, and I had pitched myself, even though there wasn't necessarily a role available, to the performance director. And he had been interested in the yoga and the meditation and the recovery, and that was essentially how I was able to get my role within that department. But they still were unsure about how I would fit in. And so it was one of those things where it was like, okay, you can come back tomorrow. We'll let you know at the end of tomorrow if you can come back. And then once I was involved and once I actually got to see these guys in action and be a part of that environment, I fell in love with it. And they accepted me wholeheartedly, and the rest is kind of history, because they ultimately ended up creating a role for me, and that's, what led me here.
So did you feel like to get into that role, like you took a bit of a chance?
Yeah.
Like put yourself out there a bit?
Oh yeah, no, I definitely did. I remember I was pretty nervous before I went up to speak to the director, because, when you're I had worked with athletes at a high level, but not professional athletes yet. And so, when you first initially walk into that setting, you feel something a little bit different.
Right.
So yeah, no, it was exciting.
So you spent 4 years there. They were very successful. You were strength and conditioning coach. What was the highlight of that role? Like both what happened on the pitch, because I know that you won things, but like professionally, what were your highlights?
So professionally, I mean, it was quite a different year, or a couple of years, because for a few of those was COVID, and when we won the cup, I would say that was probably one of the most unique years that I will always look back on in my career as being something completely different than I've ever experienced. And it was because of the level of connection and communication, and just how I got to know these players completely different than in any other setting, because I spent so much time with them. I mean, you could say that I spent more time with them than I spent with my family or friends that year during COVID. And at the time I had been the only female. So when we went to the MLS's back tournament in Florida, I was the only female with 30 dudes for a month and a half, which is a lot.
Right, yeah.
It's a lot. But I think professionally, I knew those players better than I've ever known any player. But I also realized the value in that, and being able to get a player to push even further, and understanding them on the level of, I know exactly how you're going to feel at this minute, or when we do this, or, when we talk about this, or what's going on in your life, and all of that. I think all of those things sometimes are overlooked as a part of the puzzle, and you have to understand your athletes. And after that year and knowing them so well, I think I approach how I communicate and how I get to know players a little bit differently.
Do you think the pandemic almost acted like a bit of an accelerator program for you personally, because you had more experiences in a short space of time than you would have over like 5 or 6 years?
Yeah, no, I think it did, because it was one part of it was that you spend a lot of time together. The other part of it was you didn't know when someone was going to test positive. So you had to be ready to fill in this and do this and do that. And there was always moments where, our head of strength and conditioning could test positive, and then I have to step in and do things that I've never done before, or, so-and-so. So I think that there was all the way up until even, the cup game, the MLS final, we had 2 of our DPs, test positive. I think it was like the week before that game, and we had 2 people had to step up into that role. So it was just having that mentality of, like, you have to be ready to do everything at any point. And so it was. Yeah, it definitely accelerated a lot of things.
So your next role is Angel City. You got the head of sports science role. That's a club that's captured the imagination, I mean, of the world, if we're honest. Like a lot of people love that club. Talk to me about your time there, and like, what did you enjoy about being there?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really unique time to work in the NWSL, because things are changing so much, and I think it's incredible to see the support and the level of just, I would say, spotlight on these people, and that they've never had that before. And that was originally what had drawn me even to them in the first place. But what I was amazed by is just these women and what they've been through, since pretty much the inception of the NWSL, and just in order to play the sport that they love, and how hard they've had to work just to get there and be able to have transparency. And I think I was really proud to be a part of that, even just for a small time, because it inspired me as a person and as a female, and just in sports in general. I think it's something very powerful to see. And on top of that, you see the women that have children and then they play and they come back in a month or 2 months or however it is, but it's wild. I don't think people truly understand how hard it is to do that, and physically what your body is going through, and the game is still the game, and it's still going to hit you like it does these guys, and the fact that they can do that on top of it, I think, is really amazing.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next section, the St. Louis City SC section. Everybody's got an interesting story about how they got introduced to the club. I'd love you to tell the fans how the connection happened.
I don't know how interesting it is, but I was put in touch with Jared, and it was by another performance director, and we had initially just been put in touch, and I hopped on a call with him and ended up speaking to him for a couple of months, actually. We just kind of, we're talking for a couple of months, and they were trying to get me to come visit. And, obviously it was a long way in Los Angeles, but I ended up coming out here for one day and for one training session. And in all honesty, I think I had no idea that what I was walking into and how I was going to feel, but I think everyone understands when you meet people and you feel comfortable, and that's something that it's a unique feeling, and that when you can have a conversation with someone and you automatically feel like you know them and all of that. I don't know that happens very often, and especially in this type of professional environment where people are interested in getting to know you and interested in what you do, and I think that's really valuable. So for me, it was really special to be able to come here that one day. I met all of the players, met everyone, and when I walked away, I was like, wow, this is different.
Was there anything about the facility that stood out for someone in your profession specifically?
I think that, the facility, the fact that as an expansion club there was a facility is big. Right. Because there are certainly expansion clubs that are still working through those things. But it's the way that it is designed, and the fact that it just opens up onto the pitch with the weight room. Obviously I have a nice view from my office. I can look out. But I think that's really creates this environment of a family, of people getting to know each other, and it sets it up nicely for those players.
Does it feel like a startup for people on the sporting side as well? We work in corporate, and there is startup culture and there's corporate culture, and it feels very like we're on a journey together. Is it the same on the sporting side?
No, I mean, I think there's always going to be growing pains, but I don't necessarily see them at all. And that, I think that's a testament to what they really developed early on, and hiring Bradley early on and being able to create that connection and establish the culture right away with both the players that came in and what they were looking for. I think if everyone had started that first day, it would have been very different. Yeah. Because you could already tell that people had a way of working together. It comes down to the people and the processes that you have in place, and that was already there. So I think for us on our side, while we're still figuring some things out when it comes to new drills and things like that, for the most part, I do feel like we have a pretty good process already in place.
That's great. So you are head of sports science. I think it's still a role that has a bit of mystique around it. It sounds awesome. Like, we see you hanging out with the technology and mixing with the players. Would you be able to give the St. Louis City fans like the elevator pitch of like what your role is at the club?
Well, I've been told that I am a hoarder of data. And that basically that is, what my role encompasses, but it does have a lot of different elements to it. And it's taking into consideration all of those elements. But if I were to summarize it, I take a lot of things into consideration to answer questions. And that's really what it is. But they are physical questions, psychological questions, where they are at recovery-wise, performance-wise. Can we do these things better on the field, or physically, can we perform at this level? All of those are questions that the staff has or that we need to answer as a club to continue growing. And that's where I come in.
And how does your team set up in the organization?
So basically, for us, it's just myself and Jared in the performance department, and then we have the medical side, which is all of our ATs and PT. So that's it, really.
Right.
So it's a fairly small staff when it comes to the performance side, but we kind of handle everything.
Luce and Bradley have got like a very specific philosophy when it comes to like how the game is played. It's aggressive, it's fast, it's relentless. Is that part of the appeal? Like, do you investigate that before you take a role like this? Is this something new for you?
I don't think it's necessarily new. They do have a very specific style of play, and it does have a physical output that might be different across the board, positionally and more like tactically as a whole. So I think that proposes a little bit of a challenge, which I do enjoy. But I also think it's a specific type of player, and I talked about this a little bit, but I was drawn initially even to that style of things because the type of player that we have, these guys will literally probably run through a wall if you asked them to, and they might try to tell you why they shouldn't run through the wall, but ultimately they do that. And as an athlete, I was that way too, so I've always felt like I can easily relate to that, but then at the same time they need to be saved from themselves, and I understand that too, and I take that part of my job very seriously.
Yeah, so one of the most important factors of your job is keeping players on the pitch. How integrated are you into like the sort of day-to-day running and of the team? Or like, sorry, let me rephrase that. Like, how important is it to have you in the room with the coach so you can make sure that those players stay on the pitch? And like, is there like a not a power struggle, but sometimes a player is going to be fatigued. And sometimes there's an important game. Like, how do you kind of strike these balances through the season?
Yeah, I think we look at a lot of different things, and this comes into play where Jared and I relationship, we have to be constantly communicating, and so that's something that whether or not I'm in the room or he's in the room, he knows how I feel, and I typically know how he feels about something, or we're on the same page. And that's pretty important across the whole. I think if you overly communicate, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And as a staff, honestly, Bradley's very open to that as well, and everyone's very open to that. So I think that helps when it comes to mitigating injuries and monitoring fatigue on a daily basis. That's really important. I don't think I've ever had a coach come over on the sideline and ask me how the loads are. Like, I don't think any coach have had that capacity to be able to think about all of those things, but Bradley does that. And I think that makes him really unique as a coach as well, because he takes in consideration all of these things. But yeah, on a daily basis, it can be challenging because we are looking at both, internal and external load and how they're responding to the on-field stimulus on a daily basis. So we do have to try to meet our objectives, but then we also have to look at it on the individual level and how they respond to it.
I've heard the role explained with baked potatoes, that the player is the baked potato and you don't want to undercook them and you don't want to overcook them. Can you explain that concept for fans? Because sometimes we want to see players back on that pitch immediately when they come back from injury, and they only get 20 minutes at the end.
Yeah, me
like,
too.
What's that? What's that about?
What's that? No, it's a very good analogy to look at that. But I think you have to consider, and this is where I said it's a lot of different factors that play into that fatigue and what we're monitoring. And I look at it as okay, when you drive a car, for example, right? Maybe the conditions aren't great. It's raining, so that increases your risk for an accident. Maybe you're tired, so that also increases your risk for an accident. Maybe you're going super fast on that day, also increases your risk. So I'm never going to be able to tell you exactly the day that you might get in a car, which is a morbid statement, but I'm never going to be able to tell you when you might get injured or predict that. If I could, I'd make a lot of money. But we can always say you're at an increased risk for injury, right? You're at a decreased risk for injury. So sometimes, when players are coming back from injuries and we're looking at, how much have they been able to handle in this week, or how much have they been able previously, what are the demands of that position? What are the demands of that game and that opponent? We take all of that, and then knowing their background, their injury history, where they're at, in their recovery and their return to play, all of that is going to go into how many minutes they play, or maybe why sometimes we know that a player isn't recovering and as well and maybe can't go. But ultimately, my goal is to keep them on the field and to give Bradley the most minutes that he can with every single player. And so I think that's something that I always want them to know, that I'm not trying to keep them off the field. It's the opposite.
Right. A lot of fans think keeping players off of the injury, like keeping players uninjured, is luck.
Yeah.
I know an impact injury, like a broken leg, is luck. But soft tissue injuries, like hamstrings, people in your position don't always agree that it's luck. Can you talk about how you, like, what does fatigue do? Like, what does fatigue mean, and why is it related to injuries?
Yeah. So, I mean, essentially, fatigue can be a couple different things. So this is where that peripheral fatigue comes into play.
Right.
There you go.
Full circle.
Full circle. And, central nervous system fatigue or CNS fatigue. So you have those couple different things. But then you also have perceived fatigue, which is a third component. And that's essentially how the player feels about it, right? Because that's important mentally, because if they think they're fatigued, but really I'm like, you're fine. There's still that element that can maybe keep them from performing at their best, right? So we want to include all of that. But that's something that with fatigue, we have to look at multiple different things. I would never want to just check off one box and be like, tired. Can't do it today. As much as I like to check that box off for myself sometimes. But we have to look at lots of different things that then can show us, okay, maybe they're not feeling quite up to what they need to be today. But yeah, fatigue will show up in all of those places. And in order to mitigate it, you have to address a lot of different things like sleep, nutrition, on-field load, and maybe we bring that down, a little bit so that they can push that 90 minutes or that extra couple of minutes in the game. But all of those things will then help mitigate fatigue.
And if too much fatigue leads to a high chance of
injury,
of
yes.
Injury.
Yeah, and with like muscular fatigue, for example, like it's just going to be a decreased amount of force and output within your muscle. So like that's when that risk for maybe injuring, a hamstring or whatnot, because then you make that sprint that's just beyond that capacity of the muscle. And that's why we pay such a close attention to sprinting and what we're doing with the posterior chain, et cetera, et cetera.
So the players wear these black sports bras with Stat Sport written on the front, and there's little contraptions in them. There's a rumor that they collect data, and that data helps you. Like, what does that little pack do that we see on players all over the world? Yeah.
No, we're not just, listening to their conversations and recording them. It's basically just a little bit, the GPS, the Global Positioning System, is essentially what it stands for. But it contains a lot of different measuring tools within it, like a accelerometer, a gyroscope, believe is what it's called. But a lot of those different things, and they can then measure what we're looking at on field. It also connects to a heart rate monitor, which can then tell us a little bit more about the internal load. and what we're seeing in that response. But it's tracking how fast they're going, how hard they're accelerating and decelerating, and how much they're running, where they're running on field. We can even see that. So there's a lot of different things that we're able to see with that little gadget.
And are you monitoring that in real time as the game goes on, and do you feed that into the coaching staff?
Yes. So I'm looking at a lot of different metrics, but we look at a lot of HML distance, which is anything that's more intense. So if you think of something that requires a high metabolic load, that's going to be your sprinting and explosive distance. So those two things combine to make that metric, which then tells us how intense this game is for you, or maybe how intense this drill is for you. But then we can also see other things related to that, because I know with accel decels, that's going to increase your muscular load quite high, and then obviously like a total distance amount. So we get to see a lot of that.
And how complex is it to operate at the level that you do in the MLS, where 1 week you can be playing in 13 degrees, then the next week you're in California, and then the next week you're in high altitude? Like, how does that factor into your modeling for making sure that players are at peak fitness?
So I think it's something that we will see even more of as it starts to get warmer. So that's when it becomes really interesting. We've been pretty lucky that the weather has been fairly consistent in where we've played, except for obviously here, which then we have the advantage because we're used to that,
Right.
which isn't so bad. But that's where I think nutrition is even more important, and how they're fueling and hydrating prior to the games. And that's something that really goes into the temperature shifts. So we'll look at that. But as far as temperature goes, that's actually a new data point that I would say that I've been adding to my giant spreadsheet to see if there's any correlation between. So check back in at the end of the season and I'll let you know.
We had Jared Phillips on the podcast, our director of sports performance. He said not only were you one of the best sports science people that he's worked with, he also said you had incredible depth of the range of talents. Very complimentary. He retweeted that we were on the podcast today. He loves working with you. Talk to me about like what your relationship is, and what you give to him and what he gives to you.
Yeah. Well, he is why I'm here. So I think that we definitely complement each other because we have various backgrounds and we've come from different clubs, and his experience with being in another expansion club, and being able to have that the differences that we have, but then also have a similar understanding, is really helpful for us being on the same page, because I've always felt like, I can say something and maybe I disagree with him, but then he steps back and is able to think about it in a different way, and vice versa. But for the most part, I've felt like we complement each other in our skill sets as well, and just how we view the game and what we push each other to look at. So that's been really helpful for, I think, both of us, and hopefully it sounds like he enjoys that, so that's good. But yeah, that dynamic is unique for sure. And you have to have the same methodology to a certain extent. You want to be able to challenge each other and give constructive feedback for sure, because like I said, game is evolving. What we're looking at is evolving, and there's no way that one possible person can look at everything at once. And so to be able to have someone that you trust, and while we're still developing that trust as we are getting more and more into the season, I think, you have to be able to know that I'm going to see that, or he's going to see that. And then, Bradley ultimately has to trust both of us to be able to bring that information forward. Obviously, Jared always has the final say, so I might disagree, but I'll come back to it and push it a little bit more. But yeah, no, I think it's good, and we both have pretty strong strength and conditioning backgrounds, so that also works well together.
Brilliant. The generation of players that are on the pitch at the moment have grown up with FIFA, foot cards, Football Manager. Like, they're very focused on data. Like, we're about to see the next batch of FIFA numbers come out. I'm sure that our players will be interested in there. Do they tap you for their personal data?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. When I said these are some of the most competitive players I've ever worked with, I meant it. But no, I think we've developed that, right? We've created this culture of we're striving to hit this objective and to push further physically on the field and to push further mentally every single day. And so having those markers of progress is really important for an athlete in general. And I'm really excited that these guys are even interested in what it is and what it means. And they're always joking, like, tell us the science, Kelly. Why? And, you know, I've even shown some visuals on the TVs in the weight room, and they go bananas when it comes to who is on that one? What are we doing? We got to know who that is. They're just trying to make each other better. And I think that that's something that I've never experienced with a group of athletes, how much excitement there is, but in a positive way of, you know, we want everyone to be strong on this team. And so we're going to push each other and hold each other accountable to that. And having the data, that transparency of being able to send that out and for them to see that and be excited to see it, but not take it in a way of, you know, oh, I didn't do a whole lot today. Or it's a positive thing of, you know, okay, you know, today, yeah, that's about what I thought it was going to be. Or wow, I was able to hit a new high, and I'm really excited about that. But I think that it's important to take it within that context and not be judgmental about it.
Do you think the players being inspired by data, does that come from having a sporting director and a manager that are interested in data, or does that come from having a culture at the club that's like very competitive and interested in reaching higher levels?
I think it's the competitive culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that environment's created from the top down. So if we're competing on everything, then that's what we're trying to, you know, continuously push. And that type of culture needs to be, I don't know, I guess encompassed by everyone at the club. And so that's for sure where it's coming from.
Brilliant. Okay, tell me what excites you the most about the industry of sports science and where it's heading at the moment.
What excites me is the possibilities because, like I said before, we could measure everything if we wanted to. We're not going to. I don't want to do that. That's too much work. No, that would be overwhelming. But I think you also have to take a look at what's the most important to you. What are the questions that you need to answer on a daily basis that are going to show the coaches where these players are at and whether or not we're prepared for each match or, you know, even on a practice, because we do have daily objectives and they're both physical, mental, and all the above. So that to me is always going to be really interesting. But the industry as a whole, I mean, the gadgets, the technology that we have now, you know, we have the Oura Ring, we have Whoop that you could wear, we have, you know, blood testing that we can do. There's so many different things. So right now we've started really just with the bare bones and what can be the most simple and effective for us. And it's really not, I don't know the word sexy by any means, but the ability to broaden and expand that is infinite.
Fantastic. So final question from me. And what does success look like for you in season 1?
For me personally, I think there's very little injuries, everyone on the field, and everyone being able to achieve physical, you know, outputs, not even just, I guess, outputs, but to feel the way that they want to feel when they step on the field and to perform the way that they need to perform. I think, you know, that to me is really, really important. And so that conversation between me and the players, I think goes further than anything. But for us as a team, we obviously want to compete in every single game and win games and make playoffs and continue pushing as much as we can.
Brilliant. Okay, got a few questions from the fans.
Yes.
Miss Abigail, she just wanted to say, can you just spend the whole time talking about Miss Nala?
Yeah.
So your dog is out there. Yeah. The fans have found it. Mm-hmm. This was an interesting one from I Am the Rog. How has AI-based predictive modeling changed the sports science industry? And do you see that as an opportunity for advancement?
Yeah, I think it has changed the industry. I don't know that it's made as big of an impact, but it certainly made people think about it. I would say that the only thing about that is looking at the reliability and the validity of what you're testing and what you're looking at to be able to develop those predictive models. That's something that a straight data analyst would need to probably take on, and not a sports scientist. It's a little bit on that in that direction for me, but I think you can't take the personal element out of what we're doing, and that's something that, while it gives you the context and some maybe different information that you normally wouldn't have, it's never going to replace, I believe, your ability to know the athlete and see all of those other things. Like I said, I wouldn't want to just tick that one box. I would need 5 or 6 other things that tell me the same thing before I say yes.
Great. I've got SLCP Riot Girls. The sports industry and scientific community have often faced challenges for being unwelcoming or difficult for women. Can you speak to your experience, what you needed to succeed, and what you wish will change sooner rather than later?
Yeah, I think it's the assumption that, or assumptions, are what make it the most challenging as a female, because there's always going to be a lot of assumptions, when you step into a room and when you get the role, or in any other setting. And that, to me, is always going to be the hardest part, because I'm coming from a place of that assumption and proving it wrong, or constantly trying to be perfect in what I do, because I think as a female sometimes you are representing that, and you have to be, because the judgment as a whole and a stereotype is very quick to happen if you make a mistake. So I think that to me is something that I do think about, but it's more just when I walk into the room versus a male counterpart, sometimes, maybe not all the time, an athlete's going to go up to that person instead of me, thinking they're the boss rather than I am. And that's not their fault. It's something that they've been accustomed to seeing, and so it's different, right? But you can't change that necessarily overnight or influence that, but all you can really do is just earn their trust and earn their respect. And sometimes I wish I didn't have to do that, but I do think that my relationships end up being stronger because I do have to prove it.
Great answer. Final one from STLJL tweets. Any examples of when your gut instinct conflicted with the data you analyze?
Oh, yeah. Sure. I like I said, the data provides answers to questions sometimes, but it also makes answering questions easier. But it doesn't do the job for us. I think there's certainly been times where I've looked at a player and been like, okay, everything is telling me that they should be tired. This is, something that's they've never done before, yada, yada, yada. But I look up on the field, they look fine. They, their technical skills have not dropped off. And when you ask them afterwards, they're like, yeah, I felt great. So there's certainly things that sometimes we look at the data and we see that information in front of us, but we have to go with, okay, the eye test, what back to your coaching days where you have to be able to see and observe what they're doing to determine that. And then there's been other instances where it's just been straight up wrong. So, the technology has gotten a lot better, for sure, especially when it comes to force plates and force frame and looking at that information. It's way more reliable than it was in the past, but you do have outliers and you have to be able to spot them. And so it does require a human.
That's good news. Well, thank you for answering those questions. Thank you to all the fans that submitted them. Kelly, it's been incredible to have you on the show. You've been an amazing guest. I've learned so much listening to you, and we're all rooting for you this season. Brilliant start. Thank you for sharing this moment with the fans, and hopefully we can have you on at the end of the season to get an assessment of how you felt it all went.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. This was awesome.
Amazing. And if you are listening to this on a podcast, get on iTunes, give us a 5-star rating, and leave us a nice review, and let Kelly know how you feel about this so that she will come back on at the end of the season. And on that note, I'll say ciao for now. Thank you. Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.